Virtue signaling is this pejorative term that was used for elites who, through certain kinds of community service, volunteering, and fundraising, signal that they're a certain type of citizen, they're a certain type of human being, they're a certain kind of moral agent, and it was meant in a sort of snarky, condescending way. But I, being as I am, thinks that this term actually exposes or illuminates the admissions process and the expectations for pre-health students in terms of entering a social contract in healthcare and caring for society in which they are a public servant of sorts, even though they may work for a private institution, and that how they engage with service prior to becoming a professional will foreshadow the kind of professional that they will be. Say, for example, we have students that who volunteer at the Bailey Boucher House, which is the first AIDS hospice in the United States. It requires a year-long commitment. It requires students to show up every week for a certain amount of time. And it requires them to work with a very marginalized population. Now, this population isn't as large as it used to be in terms of how they end up in hospice and because of these antiretroviral cocktails. But nevertheless, when a student is working with whether it be LGBTQI population infected with AIDS or immigrant populations who are being affected by the lack of having, being naturalized, for lack of a better phrase, for having citizenship, or poor kids who are involved in a poorly resourced urban education, it signals to committees the kind of citizen they are. Now, you could think about that in sort of Machiavellian terms as being, very, you could read it in suspicious terms, and that the candidate is trying to manipulate the committee. But there's another way in which if you know this, it can help you think about and reflect upon what are the real moral implications for working with these populations, and how, in working with these very marginalized populations, it could illuminate one's own class, privilege, but also the kind of heart and affect and compassion and empathy that we expect people in healthcare to have developed before they enter professional school.
I like to talk about community service and volunteer work. These words are often used interchangeably, but there are distinct differences. For example, community service can be court-ordered or can be used to fulfill certain requirements for citizenship. However, volunteer work is solely based on the altruistic nature of an individual and does not include social benefits or financial benefits. One might ask himself, why volunteer? Why dedicate your time to attending to the needs of others when there are no social or financial benefits? Well, it's simple. To simply help others. The driving force for any medical student trying to be a doctor or a medical professional is to help others. Chin Yun Sun describes authentic volunteering as sincere, natural, original, and real. Mastering these qualities is essential for a medical student to prove their desire to help others.
I studied Dr. Margaret Brown's research titled Learning from Service, the Effect of Helping on Helpers' Social Dominance Orientation. Dr. Brown is a professor of psychology here at SPU and also works as the assistant provost for the special projects and director of the Center for Scholarship and Faculty Development. Dr. Brown examined the participants in this study based on their social dominance orientation and empathy. She writes, "The social dominance theory proposes that a basic part of human nature is to establish and maintain group-based hierarchies. Participants who completed a randomly assigned 9-week helping experience scored lower in social dominance orientation and higher in empathy, as compared to those who completed a similar non-helping experience. Dr. Brown found that empathetic concern, the affective component of empathy, acted as a significant mediator of one's social dominance orientation. According to Dr. Brown's research, people high in social dominance orientation endorse the view that some social groups are superior to others and should rightfully dominate the inferior groups. For example, research has shown that being in high-status university majors is related to increases in an individual's social dominance orientation over time, and the reverse was true of low-status university majors. Service learning reduces the social dominance orientation, which gives us a greater understanding of course material, an increased awareness of the issues facing one's community, and a fuller, more empathetic appreciation of the service population.
Another reason to go into volunteering is simply to improve one's interpersonal and social skills. These skills are not only useful right now as a student, but in the future with colleagues and patients. The key to any successful relationship is communication. Interpersonal and social skills are essential to a successful relationship.
I studied the general concepts of servant leadership and its importance in a pre-professional and medical setting. We need to start by asking, what is servant leadership? Why should we care about this as a pre-health student? The answer, it builds character and teaches you how to put others first. As defined by Robert K. Greenleaf, the founder of the modern servant leadership movement and the Greenleaf Center for Servant Leadership is a philosophy and set of practices that enriches the lives of individuals, builds better organizations, and ultimately creates a more just and caring world. As pre-health students, we are instructed to be leaders so that we may enable ourselves for success. It can be easy for us to get caught up in this dynamic because, for many of us, leadership means exhibiting a confident and dominant personality that naturally calls others to follow by its example. We think that way we may be helping others in this regard, but we are in fact creating an atmosphere of social dominance, something which should be avoided. This is where we need to step down from this podium and understand how we can help ourselves by helping others. While traditional leadership generally involves the accumulation and exercise of power by one at the top of the pyramid, the servant leader shares power, puts the needs of others first, and helps people develop and perform as highly as possible. The natural desire for humans, even though we may not like to admit it, is to be selfish. What many do not realize, however, is that being a servant leader can be one of the most rewarding things to do because it gives you the satisfaction of knowing you are capable of empathy and prioritizing the lives of others.
Virtue signaling is any action or opinion displayed to the public that would make others think you are a good person. This can include social media posts, speeches, experiences written on resumes or in other applications, or any other form of public communication. Virtue signaling is often termed by scholars pathological kindness, meaning the act is more about the person doing the service than it is about the person being served. Brandon Ambrosino calls it a powerful and irrational illusion of helping, indifferent to the fact that anyone has actually been helped. He goes on to say, what is important to note about this sort of empathy is that it doesn't really matter what happens to the object of one's empathy. Virtue signaling stems from the dual definition of kindness as kinship and generosity. Generosity often gets tossed aside for the more obvious manifestation of kindness in the form of kinship. Virtue signaling is the accruing of compassion points for the sake of status in the group. It emphasizes the emptiness of gestures. Virtue signaling teaches kindness as a currency. Matthew chapter 6, verse 5 says, "And when you pray, do not be like the hypocrites, for they love to pray, standing in the synagogues and on the street corners, to be seen by others. Truly I tell you, they have received the reward in full." Medical schools, and more importantly, patients, do not care about checklists and how empathetic your resume says that you are. They care about how the experiences on your resume have shaped you, grown your empathy, and what they have taught you about human experiences that are not your own. Compassion points do not get you far in the real world. Kindness is not a currency. It is an attribute that requires thoughtful consideration and reflection on learned skills and experiences. Virtue signaling is a very tempting trap to fall into, trying to impress your peers, professors, and admissions boards. It is easier to virtue signal than to actually develop virtue. Being aware of and educated about phenomenons like this is important in our healthcare journeys, so that we can catch ourselves if we begin to fall into the traps of virtue signaling rather than virtue development.
To wrap up, I'll mention a powerful quote by the poet Ralph Waldo Emerson. It is one of the most beautiful compensations of life that no man can sincerely try to help another without helping himself. Thank you.